Vishnupad Paramhamsa Parivrajakacarya Ashtotar Shat Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Abhay Charanarvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Gaur Premanandi Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This is Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 23, Text 43. Manogunan vai srujate baliyas tatascha karmani vilakshanani Shuklani krishnanyathalohitani Tebhyas swavarnastrityo bhavanti Srutayo bhavanti Tebhyas swavarnastrityo bhavanti Manogunan vai srujate baliyas Tatascha karmani vilakshanani Shuklani krishnanyathalohitani Tebhyas swavarnasrutayo bhavanti Manogunan vai srujate baliyas Tatascha karmani vilakshanani Shuklani krishnanyathalohitani Tebhyas swavarnasrutayo bhavanti
Manogunan vai srujate baliyas Karmani vilakshanani Shuklani krishnani atalohitani Yassya varna srutayo bhavanti Manogunan vai srujate baliyas Tatascha karmani vilakshanani Shuklani krishnani atalohitani Tebhyas swavarnasrutayo bhavanti
Manogunan vai srujate baliyas Tatascha karmani vilakshanani Shuklani krishnani atalohitani Yassya varna srutayo bhavanti
Vaishnavis Manaha the mind Gunan the activities of the modes of nature Vai indeed Srujate manifests Baliyaha very strong Tataha by those qualities Cha and Karmani material activities Vilakshanani of different varieties Shuklani,
Shuklani,
white in the mode of goodness.
white in the mode of goodness.
Krishnani,
Krishnani,
black in the mode of ignorance.
black in the mode of ignorance.
Atha and Lohitani,
Lohitani,
red in the mode of passion.
red in the mode of passion.
Tebhyaha, from these activities. Swavarnaha, having the same corresponding colors.
Having the same corresponding colors.
Srutayaha, created conditions.
Created conditions.
Bhavanti,
Bhavanti,
arise.
arise.
Translation and purport by the followers of Srila Prabhupada. Translation: the powerful mind actuates the functions of the material modes, from which evolve the different kinds of material activities in the modes of goodness, ignorance, and passion. From the activities in each of these modes, develop the corresponding statuses of life. In the mode of goodness, one considers oneself to be a saintly or wise person. In the mode of passion, one struggles for material success. And in the mode of ignorance, one becomes cruel, lazy, and sinful. By the combination of the material modes, one identifies oneself as a demigod, a king, a rich capitalist, a wise scholar, etc. These conceptions are material designations generated from the modes of nature, and they arrange themselves according to the tendency of the powerful mind to enjoy temporary sense gratification. The word baliyas in this verse, meaning very strong, indicates the material mind becomes insensitive to intelligent advice. Even if we are informed that we are committing many sins and offenses in order to earn money, we may still think that money should be acquired at all costs, since without it one can neither perform religious ceremonies nor gratify the senses with beautiful women, mansions, and vehicles. Once the money is achieved, one suffers further problems. But the stubborn mind will never heed good advice in this regard. One must therefore give up mental concoction and control the mind in Krishna consciousness, as exemplified here by the Brahmana from Avanti. ॐ ज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जलिशलाकाय चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमः ॐ विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामी इति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे विशेषशून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्यैव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधार शिवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. So today morning we are discussing one of the very significant this very significant aspects of the Bhagavatam's teachings. So I'll first explain what the verse is saying. How can we remove this from here? Okay. No. Yesterday this video was not coming. How can we avoid this video? This video? Yeah, yesterday this was not there on the screen. Was it there? When you share, what do you do? Remove. Okay.
Share the screen option.
Okay. So, this verse is speaking about the predicament of the living being. Mano Gunan, let me explain the verse and then we will talk about how we can address what is being spoken over here. So, this verse is talking about four broad things. Mano Gunanvai Sujate Baliyas. So, basically, if we consider the soul to be in the center, so around the soul, there is the mind. This is what the verse is saying. Mano Gunanvai Sujate Baliyas. The mind is very strong. And I'll just put this as MI. And then there is MO, that is the modes. So the modes are external. Then, so based on the mind, there is a connection between the mind and the modes. It's cyclic. I'll explain this a little later. It goes both ways. Then from the modes, it says that there are actions. So it says karmani vilakshanani. So mano gunanvai sujate baliyas. So from the kind of mode that we have, Shuklani Krishnani Athalohitani, we from the based on the kind of mind we have, we attract a certain kind of modes. And then that leads to certain kind of actions. And those actions lead to conditions, or we can say situations. And these four things basically trap the soul. So let's try to understand this. So the mind is internal. We'll talk about where the modes are a little later. We'll talk about what the modes are. But basically, the soul, we right now we are in particular situations. Say for all of you are in a temple, but you are working in a particular job, you're studying in a particular university, you're staying in a particular family, we are in a particular country. So we are in certain external conditions. But now the external conditions can be physical, social, environmental, all of them. In those conditions, we are doing certain actions. And while doing those actions, there are certain influences on us. Subtle influences are the modes. And then, apart from all this, there is the mind. The mind is inside us. So we could say that these two are subtle. The mind and the modes are subtle. And the actions and the conditions are, relatively speaking, gross. Sukshma and sthula. So what is this verse saying is that mano gunan vai sujate baliyas. The mana is very strong. It's extremely powerful. And we are having this powerful mind, we are impelled to certain activities. Tatascha karmani vilakshanani. We are impelled towards certain activities. And the activities are of different kinds based on the modes. Shuklani Krishnani Athalohitani. And while we are impelled towards such activities, Tebhya Swavarana Sutayo Bhavanti. So here Varana refers to color, but Varana also refers to the Varnashram system, the Varna. I'll talk about the correlation a little later. Sutayo Bhavanti. Thereby we create various conditions. The same theme is talked about by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita when he talks about Yam Yam Vapi Smaran Bhavam. The last part of that verse is Sada Tad Bhava Bhavitaha. So Bhava Bhavitaha, what that means is that the internal manifests as the external. And of course, the external also reshapes the internal. So let's put this a little more simply. If I put the soul as over here, there is external, internal, and there is external. So the internal affects the external, and the external affects the internal. But in this whole process, what happens is the soul gets trapped. To put it even more contemporary terms, we could put the same thing as the soul is here. Internal, we have vices. The vices, what are the vices that we have? The anger, greed, all this kama, krodha, love. And outside we have devices. Okay. our vices attract us towards certain devices. Hmm? So if somebody has a lot of greed, their phone will be phone, or their will be all gambling games. Hmm? And then those devices fuel certain vices. So basically, at one level, in terms of constitution, we can say that the soul is surrounded by the mind and then the body, the subtle level and the physical level. That is true in terms of, so this is in terms of, you could say, structure or constitution. In terms of structure, there are two circles in which the soul is situated. But in terms of function, both of these circles can actually reinforce each other in entrapping the soul. So the mind, the physical and the mental situations can reinforce and further trap the soul. So this is how we function in the world. So let's try to understand this a little bit again in somewhat this conceptual idea that the modes, the mind, the activities and the situations. How are all these connected? Now, in many ways, we can say that most of us, we are aware of the mind. We're not always consciously aware of the mind, but we are aware that there is something called the mind, and that mind affects us. And if you know a little bit of philosophy, we can understand that the mind often acts as an enemy. So, what exactly is the mind? At one level, the mind is a vital tool, a vital and essential tool for the soul to link with the body. That means, if you consider the soul is here, the mind is here, the body is here, and then the external world is here. So, the consciousness of the soul comes through the mind. This is consciousness. So the consciousness is like the energy of the soul. So if I have this phone and say I have a flashlight. So now this flashlight, the light is coming out from here. Now if I place this, you don't see any light. But if I place it like this, then what happens? The pathway, the light is coming through this pathway. So basically this phone is like the soul, and light coming from it is consciousness. So consciousness is the energy of the soul, and that comes through the subtle body, and that subtle body is it's mind, intelligence, ego, but a shorthand we can call it as the mind. So the consciousness comes through the mind to the physical level, and in that sense the mind is essential as a functional unit for our function. So when we say somebody is absent-minded, so what happens when somebody is absent-minded? Basically, that the same thing, the soul is here, the body is here, but the mind has gone somewhere here. So what is happening is, the consciousness is going through here wherever the mind is. And that's why I say we are talking with someone, and then we sense that the eyes have become glazed. And then say, earth to you, earth to you. That is a common phrase in English. Earth to you means come back from your dreamland to earth. So the idea is, when we are absent-minded, what it means is the body is at a particular place, but the mind is absent there. And then when we are absent-minded, we can't function very well. So for our functioning, the mind is the essential channel through which our consciousness will go to the outer world. So going back to this previous diagram, so we could say that the soul is the root of consciousness, and the mind is the route of consciousness. It is the channel through which consciousness comes. Now, if I wanted to put it a little more precisely, I could put this as, this is the soul, this is the body, and actually this whole linking structure, That is the mind. So it's not that three different units, this is just for depiction. But the linking mechanism between the soul and the body is the mind. So, with this understanding, we recognize that the mind is, in one sense, essential. So, when we say we are distracted or our mind is distracted, what it means is that our mind is going somewhere else apart from where our body is. So, going back to the earlier diagram, so basically now we could put it, let's make this a little more, education has two aspects. Education is to simplify the complex and to complexify the simple. Both are there. If something is complicated, we need to make it simple, and that's education. But in reality, it's not very simple all the time. So sometimes what we think is simple, as we gain more education, we understand there is complexity in it. Like a small child is, so 3 minus 7 is not possible. Yeah, math means you subtract a smaller number from a bigger number. That's arithmetic. But then as the child grows up, yeah, you can subtract. There are negative numbers also. So there are both aspects in education. So education means what? We simplify the complex. And that is important. But then there is also, we complexify the simple. So for example, if you're training a child in colors, in color education, then initially we might tell the child that, okay, this is black and this is white. So it's easy to relatively speaking, it's easy to identify black and white. This is black, this is white. But reality rarely exists in black and white. So we simplify, okay, this is black, this is white. But afterwards, as color education increases, say everything is not simply black and white. In between, there are shades of gray. So what is right, what is wrong? So we say this is right, this is wrong. But then we understand, okay, in real life, things are not simply right or wrong, because there are multiple factors to consider. So similarly, with respect to the mind, at one level, we may say that the mind, like we normally hear the mind is our enemy and we need to control it. That's true at one level, no doubt. But at another level, the mind is an essential functional unit. Just as we cannot function with our body. We may say the body has drives which distract us. And we have to feed the body, we have to care for the body, we have to do so many things. But if we didn't have the body, we won't be able to function, at least in the material world, as long as we are here. So, similarly, the mind is also vital for us to function in the world. If the mind were not functioning, we would not be able to function. But the problem is, the mind sometimes works for us, and many times it works against us. That's why Gita often Krishna says the mind can be our friend and our enemy. So I think to complexify this a little bit more, so we could say that this is the mind. Let's make it a little bigger, and then this is the let's call it as the body and the physical world. I'm deliberately using the physical world, not material, because the mind is also material. Matter has two levels: there's the physical and the subtle mental level. So now, within the mind, just like in the outer world. Now, in the physical world, we could say that there are many different things. Let me put this over here. This is the body or the physical world. Now, within the world, there could be stimuli which are positive, which are helpful for us. There are things which we need to know, useful information we can get. See, if you are traveling on a road, there are important things which you need to see. Okay, there is a slow down sign, there is a speed bump sign, there is a school area sign, children are moving. There are so many things which we need to be aware of. There are stimuli which are positive. Then there are stimuli which are negative. No, we are just going along a road, and maybe some distracting thing is going on the side of the road. Now we don't have to. If we start looking at that, we might meet an accident. Maybe we are driving and somebody next to us The child who's doing all kind of pranks. We can't pay attention to that too much. So there could be in the physical world, there could be stimuli which are positive, there are stimuli which are negative, and then there are stimuli which are just neutral. They're just there. Right now you are hearing this class. If you are interested in the class, then what is being spoken, what is being drawn is of interest to you. But at the same time, maybe a person sitting next to you is maybe whispering something to the next person, or maybe there's a phone beep that is coming. That would be negative, that would be distracting. But at the same time, there is a particular lighting in this room, there's a particular temperature over here, the ambient temperature is there, the floor is there. Now, unless these matter, they are just there, they're stimuli. We don't really care for them, positively or negatively. So, what applies at the physical level of reality also applies at the level of the mind. At the level of the mind, within the mind, there are positive impressions. So, here we can say there are objects. In the physical world, there are objects. Some of these objects, they could be positive stimuli, negative stimuli, neutral stimuli. In the mind, there are impressions. I'll explain impressions and where they come from a little later. But in the mind, there are some impressions which are positive, some which are negative, and many that are just neutral. They are there in the mind. Let's try to understand this. Say, let's start with the negative impression. Say maybe some child had some person had a childhood trauma when their family home got burnt, and they had those traumatic impressions. So as soon as they see fire anywhere, they suddenly get panicky. Some people, if they have been especially in war zones or something like that, they have what is called as PTSD. Anyone knows what is PTSD? Yes, thank you. Post-traumatic stress disorder. So, in America, if you go, if you don't know what is PTSD, people think, which planet are you from? So many people have that. Of course, in some ways, it's a complex subject. That there are as many mental disorders as there are people with money to pay for mental disorders. Now, I'm not saying there are no mental disorders. There are serious mental problems, but sometimes these mental disorders can get multiplied. So I'll talk about dealing with the mind a little later. But the point is that this is a real problem. Say somebody was, say, some American war veteran had gone to Afghanistan or Iran or somewhere for a war, and these are not what you call as symmetrical wars. They call it asymmetrical wars. That means the people ambush and attack suddenly. It's not a war zone where we are here and there. So what happens is maybe they saw their friend or colleague just blown up by a bomb, and then after that, whenever they hear a loud sound, they get paralyzed, they collapse, they panic. So there is some small sound which comes, and that impression leads to a very negative reaction. So that kind of impression in the mind, by which a small outer stimuli leads to a disproportionate reaction, that we can call as a negative impression. Now, from a positive perspective, say somebody is a trained member of a bomb diffusion squad, and that person comes to a particular place and they know that there might be some secret bomb over here. Now their ears are trained, and somewhere they might hear a tick, 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 tick sound. Now for most of us, tick, tick, my clock is there. But for a person who is trained in bomb detection, tick, tick, as soon as they hear tick, where is it? Immediately their ears will zero in on that, and eyes will go toward that, and they will immediately move there, and they'll, okay, this is the sound. This is not the sound of a clock. This is the sound of a bomb, and then they will go there and diffuse it. So we all have certain, we could say, abilities those impressions are also stored in the mind. And when we say somebody has talent or somebody has ability, what it essentially means is that they can deal with certain physical things very competently. If somebody is good at interior decoration, then they visit a friend's house, and as soon as they enter into the house, they look for maybe a minute or two, and they'll say, if you move this sofa here, you put this painting here, and you put this showcase here, it looks so much better. Now that person may have stayed 6 months inside that house, and they will not figure it out. But immediately they can figure it out. Why? Because their mind is trained, it's expert in that way. So we all have, so it's not that everything that comes from the mind is bad. Some people have a great language instinct. That means that they just if they have to phrase something, just find the right words to phrase it immediately. Sometimes we want to say a particular point and thinking what word to use. And you're thinking, somebody else uses the word, hey, that's the exact word I wanted to say. That's what I wanted to say. So, where is this ability coming from? It's coming from the subtle body. You could say broadly it's the mind. So, within the mind, there are positives. There are positive impressions. Within the mind, there are negative impressions. And within the mind also there are neutral impressions. Neutral impressions means, say for example, each of us knows particular languages. So if I don't know Kannada or if I don't know Kannada, then if two people are talking in Kannada, for me it's just noise. Okay, they're talking. I know it's some language, so something is going on over there, but it makes no sense to me. Conversely, if somebody doesn't know English and for them they're hearing this, for them, okay, that's just some noise that is going on. So basically, there are stimuli which they're there. So I understand it, then that's fine, I understand. I don't understand it, I don't understand it. There's a stimuli that is there. It's neither really strongly positive nor strongly negative. So like that, in the mind, there are a lot of stimuli. Just like in the physical world, there are a lot of stimuli. So we talked about the inner conditions, that is the mind, and then we talked about the outer conditions. So just like with respect to outer conditions, say for example, if you are coming here for a class, now if you are interested in the class, then you will try to find out a place where you can sit and where you can concentrate and where you will not be distracted. I used to do a program in Pune, and there's one person who would come right in the beginning for the class, and he used to come for months, but he would never ask any question, never show any interest, never chant any rounds, but he would come first for the class. So then one day I asked him, you seem very enthusiastic to come for the class, but then you don't seem enthusiastic about the class. So he said, actually, my wife forces me to come for this class. I can't. And he said, I come first because, I can sit at the back and I can sit on the floor with a nice backrest. With the back wall, not the floor, the back wall. So he was coming and he would sit very comfortably. He would not sleep, but he had no interest, actually speaking. So the point is, he was coming, externally sometimes, the mode of goodness and mode of ignorance can look very similar. In the mode of goodness, a person will be calm and will be externally inactive, but they are internally focused. In the mode of ignorance also, a person is externally inactive. But the mind is internally lost. Just gone here, gone there, they're just distracted. Anyway, the point I was making is, if somebody is not interested in a class, then maybe they'll just sit in behind. Against class, in school we have what is called backbenchers. They want to do their own business. Or there are some people, if they sit for a class, they're eagerly waiting for some distraction. Something should happen in the class. So, some people are at the end of a class when there are questions. They are more interested in who is asking the question than what is the question. It's not necessarily a bad thing to know who it is, but there's a priority. So just as if we are interested, we will focus on those stimuli that are favorable, and we'll avoid the stimuli that are unfavorable. Say, a phone sending messages constantly, we put the phone aside. So what applies at the physical level? We can say at a practical level we do this. Anukulyasya sankalpa pratikulyasya varjana. At the physical level we accept what is favorable, we avoid what is unfavorable. The same applies to the mind. That within the mind also there are many stimuli. And we need to accept those stimuli from the mind which are favorable. And we need to avoid those stimuli that are unfavorable. Now, many of you have heard some philosophy before. So, as I'm speaking, you are hearing, but you are also recollecting something which you may have heard before. Hey, this point seems similar to that what I had heard. Or this point seems slightly different from what I had heard. How do the two come together over here? I really have to think how to make sense of both of them. So, essentially, when we say absorption, we say you should try to get absorption. So, what is absorption? How did the color change? Can you answer? Yeah, sure. You can ask the question, but there's no guarantee I'll answer it. Yeah, please go ahead. Okay. So, how is the intelligence getting trained? Okay, right now I am simplifying the complex. You are complexifying the simple. Okay, what I mean by that is, see, what I mean by that is that if we consider the subtle body, why did this change so much? Is this better or is this less clear? Okay. So, if we consider the mind to be like, if we consider the body to be like the hardware, the subtle body to be like the software. And then now, if we consider the subtle body to be like the software. Now, from a functional perspective, the mind, intelligence, ego. These three, if you can look at them from a functional perspective, and you can look at them from a structural perspective. I'll explain what I mean by that. Functional means how they function. So, whereas structure refers to what they are made of. So, if you want to compare it this way, with respect to software, say in our phone, there are something which you call as like, there are user installed apps. Then there are pre-installed apps. And then there is the OS, operating system. So now, from a functional perspective, each of them is different. But from a structural perspective, they're all the same. So the mind, intelligence, ego, from a structural perspective, they are the same. So from a functional perspective, there is a difference between them. So now in this analysis that I was doing, I was using the mind as a shorthand for the entire subtle body. The mind as a shorthand for the entire subtle body. So now within the mind there are components. Now we could say, is the intelligence the positive part and the mind the negative part? It's not that simple. Because Krishna says even the intelligence can be contaminated by lust. Indriyani manobuddhirasya adhishthana muchyate. So let's put it this way, that we are looking at things right now from a functional perspective. And let's not bring the intelligence into the discussion right now. Like you consider the verse 6.5. Krishna says, Uddhared Atmanatmanam Natmanam Asardayat. So he's saying, elevate yourself with your mind, don't degrade yourself with your mind. So that means that look at the mind. The mind can sometimes be used to refer to the entire subtle body. This happens in the Bhagavad Gita also in many places. Manah shashtani indriyani prakritistani karshati. So why is Krishna referring only to the mind? What about the ego? What about the intelligence? So there are in Sankhya, when Krishna talks about Sankhya in the 11th canto, in the Uddhav Gita, there he talks about, he mentions how in different branches or sub-schools of Sankhya, sometimes the number of elements that are there in the universe are, some people say it's 24, some people say it's 16, some people say it's 25, some people say it's 26. And Krishna says these are different creative ways in which the sages analyze material world. And he says, I am pleased with such creativity as long as it brings the mind towards me. Okay. So the world can be analyzed in different ways. The world is complex. So at this stage, as I said, in this particular verse, Krishna is not talking about the intelligence. So let's not get into intelligence. So we could say the intelligence is the part of subtle body which helps us to choose wisely. So now, is that also part of the software? Yes. To make this a little, user install, pre-install apps, makes them a little complex, but I use that deliberately because now you could say in the mind there are things like viruses. The mind is in the mind there is the impurity, lust, anger, greed. So those are like viruses that come onto our computer, malware or viruses they come on our computer, and then within the intelligence there are things which can help us to be vigilant. So that you could say like the antivirus software, which helps us to detect. So, but I don't want to at this point say the mind is entirely bad and the intelligence is entirely good. But the intelligence is the part of the inner software, which helps us to choose thoughtfully. So let's not get into the intelligence right now. Let's keep it as the mind itself. Is that okay? So, okay, where was I? Absorption, yeah, thank you. So you are more absorbed than me. So when we say absorption, what does it mean? Actually, absorption happens when, see, if you consider, how do I put it? Okay, here there is the soul, and here there is, you could say, the physical stimuli coming from the body. How do I put it? Okay, let me put it over here. Body is there. The physical stimuli are coming from the body. Just to illustrate, I'm making it like this. And here there is the mind. And then there are mental stimuli coming from the mind. So now, in general, what happens is when we are distracted, so the mind may be pulling us in this direction, the body or the physical stimuli pulling us in this direction. This is distraction. We are distracted. But if we consider the soul is here and say this is some external object we want to focus on. This is what we want to be absorbed in. So then, if the body is pulling us in this direction and the mind is also adding to that pull. So the mind and the body, the physical and the mental complement each other. That's when we get absorption. Let's take an example to illustrate this. Yeah, body means sense, physical level of reality. Physical level of reality. Say, for example, somebody is a trained doctor, and then they see something. Maybe they say discolored skin pigment, and they say, "Oh, this person's nails are so white." Somebody else, the nails are just white. But somebody who is trained, what is it? Oh, maybe this person has anemia. Maybe this person has some problem. So what is happening is the stimuli from the physical level are coming in, and the stimuli from the mind are coming in. And both of them are complementing. And that's how there is greater understanding, there's greater analysis. So, as I said, if you are hearing a class, when do we get absorbed in the class? So, the physical stimuli are coming in. When we say something is interesting, what does it mean? Interesting means the stimuli are coming in from outside, and that is also triggering similar stimuli from outside, so from inside. Then it's interesting. So when I say I'm bored, what does it mean I'm bored? That means some stimuli are coming in from outside, but that is not triggering any stimuli from inside. So that is if no stimuli are being triggered from inside, then that is when we need concentration. There's a difference between concentration and absorption. Concentration is effortful. The mind is going here, the mind is going there, but we're really focusing it. That's concentration. But absorption means the stimuli that are coming from outside, they're naturally triggering something similar from the mind. So I was invited to give a class in America in one place, in a college. So I was going there, I asked the organizers, which is this college? And they said, this is the American Institute of Illusion. So it was basically it was basically a university for people to make movies and documentaries and things like that. So it's called, in India we call FTI and other things, but there was film, and it is the American Institute of Illusion. So the idea is that actually most movies that people make, they bomb. Bomb means they fail. Why? Because the illusion is not good enough. It means whatever is being depicted over there, if the characters, the action, the plot, the storyline, if they're not so interesting, then we're getting the stimuli from outside, but there's nothing being triggered from inside. Then we get bored. But if what is triggered, what is being received from outside, it triggers something from inside, then that's absorption. That leads to enormous level of absorption. So, depending on nowadays there are these big entertainment franchises. There's a Marvel universe, or there's Star Wars, or whatever, Harry Potter. There are entire websites which are dedicated to analyzing various characters. And if one character there's a dialogue, one particular character makes one quote, and then there are actually whole websites which are talking, okay, this quote is a cross-reference, this quote is similar to the quote made by that character and that person. And then, okay, that quote was made in this context. If you watch some YouTube videos, you don't have to watch them, but sometimes the comments that come, oh, this quote was like this quote was like that, this quote reminds us of that person. So what is happening is when they're watching something, they are remembering something, and that is reinforcing it. So absorption means when the mind and the body work together. When the physical stimuli and the mental stimuli work together, that is when there is absorption. So that is the state where we want to go towards. So broadly speaking, what can happen is, we could say that the physical stimuli are in this direction. So the worst situation could be the physical stimuli in one direction, the mental is in the other direction. It's completely opposite. So we could say this is the most undesirable. Then we could also, like I discussed earlier, they could be in divergent directions. This is opposing direction, this is diverging. So when they are going in diverging directions, then it is for us, whichever stimuli we pay greater attention to, we pay greater focus on, that's where our consciousness will eventually go. So let me illustrate this again by another point. So you remember that earlier diagram about the soul is here, the mind is here, the body is here. So by body is the channel to a physical reality. So now the soul's consciousness can go like this, or the soul's consciousness can go like this also. So now the ideal situation is where both of these go in the same direction. So that means there's something coming from here and something coming from here is reinforcing that. So that way there is greater absorption. So we could put it this way is that there are stimuli coming from here, and when they come in from here, they trigger something in the mind, and then something comes out from here also. So then we get absorbed by that. Yes, Prabhu.
Mind know where the senses are going, and the intelligence will oppose it. So when you are just saying that the mental stimulus is taking opposite and the physical stimulus doing, so you need the mind functioning as intelligence, which is setting ground for self-verification, and the senses pulling for self-verification. Is that the
You're too intelligent for this discussion. Okay, I try to keep it simple. You are making it too complex. Okay. Well, let me address your concern. It's a valid concern. See, why I didn't want to bring the intelligence into this discussion and how it can be brought in. Let's explain this, my perspective. The basic difference between the mind and the intelligence is that the mind, we could say, acts automatically or unthinkingly, and the intelligence acts conscientiously. Let's use another word for it. The mind more or less acts spontaneously, and the intelligence acts conscientiously. This is the basic difference. The mind acts spontaneously, and the intelligence acts conscientiously. Now, is it that whenever the mind is acting spontaneously, is it always bad? Not necessarily. So we go over here that within the Gita, there is this description that if we consider the mana, within the mind, there can be said to be two broad kinds of impressions. I earlier talked about positive and negative, but let's put it over here. Here there is the vasana, and there is the varna. So vasana is lust, anger, greed, all these things. Whereas varna is the Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. So both of these are present in the subtle body. And both of these are spontaneous. A Brahmana will naturally be attracted to books. A Kshatriya will naturally be attracted toward weapons. So, now that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now we will see that even among us, some people have some hobbies. Now hobbies means they're naturally attracted toward them. So we all have certain things which we're naturally attracted to. And in modern psychology, there are people say there are different kinds of intelligences. Some people have a very good visual intelligence. They can visualize things very nice. Some people have high verbal intelligence. Some people have spatio-oriental intelligence. They can move very aesthetically, or they can fit things in very nicely, whatever. So the idea is that these impressions that are there, some spontaneous impressions are good. Like I said, spontaneously a person can say, okay, you put this house, you move this showcase here, you move this picture here, it will look much better. This happens naturally. Now, in this case, if the person thinks too much, they will actually repress their creativity. Like in sports or other places, they talk about you have a gut feeling, you have a sixth sense. And this is actually not wrong. Some people just innately know this is the right thing. Like some people who are good at language, you give them a particular point and they'll phrase it very, very nicely within a few moments. You tell them to think more, they'll think more, overthink, and they'll get paralyzed. So, how it is that the spontaneous is not always bad, and the conscientious is generally good, but not always good. So that's why I don't want to equate the mind with the bad part and the intelligence with the good part. Why is the conscientious not always good? Because if the intelligence is contaminated, then what happens is that the intelligence by its capacity to think can come up with an excuse for a wrongdoing. If I do something wrong spontaneously, I'll feel a little guilty. My face will show some kind of sign of guilt. But there are some people who are poker faced. Poker face means they show no emotion at all. It's like some batsman, the ball has nicked the bat and they know that they're out, the wicketkeeper knows they're out, but they act as if there's no question I'm out. And the umpire looks at this batsman is so confident. Maybe he's not out. So conscientiousness, that means in time of thinking. So thinking, we often say is good, but I can be thinking to determine the right thing, or I can be thinking to refute the right thing. I can be thinking to avoid the wrong thing, or I can be thinking to cover up the wrong thing also. So that's why to say that the intelligence is always good and the mind is always bad, that's not so simple. So there is a conscientious part of us and there is a spontaneous part of us. So when I am saying absorption, so if we come for a class and then we remind ourselves, this is spiritual wisdom, this is very important for me and I want to understand this. Even if I can't, don't relish it, I'm remembering Krishna, I'm connecting with Krishna, this is a seva, I'll do it, and that's why we absorb. So here what is it? Here it's conscientious. That's why I differentiate between concentration and absorption. So when we are concentrating, the intelligence is very much involved. The mind may go here and there, but I'm bringing the mind back. But when I'm absorbed, is the intelligence involved? If you want to say the intelligence in terms of the rational faculty, or if you want to say intelligence in terms of the conscientious faculty, yes, definitely it's involved. But I don't have to put in the effort. It just naturally it is happening. So basically, I'm here when I'm talking about when we use the word intelligence, the intelligence. What are we meaning by the word intelligence? Like we use the word intelligence in the philosophical sense in Shastra, but we have IQ, which is used in modern times to measure intelligence. Now, IQ is not intelligence. Intelligence is something subtler. So we can say that how does it change automatically? I don't have the intelligence to know this. Okay. Okay. So, IQ is basically information processing ability. That's what they do, okay? You add this sum, you find out the odd man among these group of elements and things like that. It's information processing. Whereas in scripture, when you talk about intelligence, it is primarily decision-making ability. If you look in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, in the 18th chapter, Krishna talks about the various elements of action. And there, he differentiates between three things: Jnana, Buddhi, and Dhruti. So, Jnana is what? Sorry? No, I don't. It's not so simple. Jnana is more of knowledge, or we can call it as perception. Knowledge. So, Jnana Krishna refers to as information coming in. How do we process it? So, he talks about this in terms of three modes in 18:20 to 22. So, how we take in information from the outer world, that is Jnana. Then 18:30 to 32, he talks of Buddhi. That is, this is how do we process the information and come to a decision. It is more decision-making ability. So for example, if I see a snake coming in, now I might mistake it to be a rope, but it's actually a snake, or it is actually a rope, and I think it to be a snake, whichever way. So that analyzing, that taking in information is jnana. Then deciding what to do, that is intelligence. Okay, should I run away from here? Should I call someone who is expert at catching snakes? Should I just alert everyone so that everyone can run away? Or actually, I know that snake is it's not a poisonous snake. So it's a devotee snake. That's what happened with Nimai. You know, when Nimai saw that small child Nimai saw the snake coming, he thought it's Ananta Sheshan. He went and laid down on the snake, and his mother was panicking. What happened? So basically, buddhi is connected with decision, and in dhruti, Krishna talks about his determination, which is more of implementation. That means after I make a decision, I need to implement that decision. So if there is a feast with, maybe a 20 course feast, a big feast is there. So the buddhi is, okay, how much can I eat now? Okay, maybe I should eat this much. But I decide, okay, I'm only going to take one serving of sweets. But then the buddhi may tell I should take only one serving, but the dhruti, if it is not there, we say, aniyor. More and more. So, now why am I giving this particular analysis over here? That when we talk about intelligence, and Krishna differentiates between intelligence and determination also. Buddhi and dhruti. So now if you're going to say that, okay, in the subtle body, where is determination? Well, there is no such thing called determination, isn't it? So, that's why I said there are different frames of analyzing things. And we are using one particular frame of analysis to keep things simple at this stage. So, we could say that within this frame of analysis, so basically, since you asked for making this complicated, let me make things complicated. See, you can say intelligence is, you could say, a function. Function means a resource to do some things. But intelligence is also an object or a thing. By what do you mean by an object? Within the subtle body, there is something called intelligence. Okay? So in that sense, intelligence is a thing. Or let's take it, let's take ego. Somebody has a big ego, we say. Now when we say big ego, does that mean their subtle body, their ego is huge? No. There is ego as a concept and there is ego as an object. Is it clear? Ego as an object means that between the soul and the subtle body, the first linking element is the ego. So everybody needs to have an ego because that's how the soul will be linked with the body, with the subtle body. So there is ego as a functional, as a structural element within the soul's functionality, soul's existence in the material world. One of the 24 elements. So ego is one of the 24 elements. So in that sense, ego is essential. Without that, we can't function. But when you say somebody has a big ego, that doesn't mean that element literally is big. That means they think too big of themselves. Isn't it? So there is ego as an object and ego as a concept. So ahankar in 7.4 in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says one of the elements, the 24 elements. But then in the 16th chapter when Krishna talks about the demoniac qualities, ahankaram balam darpam kamam krodham cha samshritah, Krishna says in the 16th chapter. So he's talking about these demoniac people think very big about themselves. They think there's no one like me, I am the greatest. So that is a person with a big ego. So when we are using the word ego, what are we referring to? We have to be careful. It is that, are we referring to the object ego or are we referring to the concept ego? Similarly, when we are using the word intelligence, are we referring to the object intelligence or are we referring to the concept intelligence? So from the perspective of the concept, well, I can see from everyone's faces that, some people find my classes exhilarating. Others find my classes exhausting. So okay. So I think this is going towards the exhausting part now. So anyway, the point I was making overall is that in this analysis, we are not bringing in the intelligence because we are basically focusing on the impressions. What is present in the subtle body? Now, within the subtle body, there are some things which come out spontaneous, which are good. Some things which come out spontaneous, which are bad. Now, beyond that, we can say there are some things we also have the capacity to reflect on issues, and that reflectiveness can be good, or it can be bad. So, let's focus on right now the content of the subtle body, and look at how we can deal with those impressions. Okay. Yes. So. Okay. So in this case, you are not complexifying things. You are showing me how I am complexifying things. Okay. So conscientious is not. I thought it was a common word, but it may not be that common. See, spontaneous means what we do without thinking. There are three different words. Now, there is consciousness. So consciousness is Chaitanya. That is what comes from the Atma. I earlier talked about the energy coming from the soul, like the light coming from the flashlight. Now, there is another word called conscientiousness. So conscientious or conscientiousness. So conscientious means basically careful. Be conscientious while you are driving. So that means, be very, very careful, be alert. So we can say, is consciousness and be conscious and be conscientious, is this the same thing? Well, be conscious means be aware. That's true. No, but be conscientious means not just be aware, be careful. Now, there could be danger over here. So normally when we are walking, we just walk along the road. But if there is some water over there, be careful. On the other hand, if there are some landmines over there, then be super careful, isn't it? So be conscientious. That means be specially attentive. So to deliberately pause and think and then to act. So in general, we need to be conscious in whatever we do. But in some activities, we need to be conscientious. Like when we are giving a class, normally we are thinking and we are conscious of what we are speaking. But if somebody asks a very controversial question, then, then it's like you have to think especially more what to speak, how to speak, what words to use, what points to speak, what point not to speak. Now some questions are like they are like intellectual banana peels. From whichever direction you step on a banana peel, there is only one result. Zoom, you're going to slip and fall. So, conscientious means like specially attentive. So, spontaneous means I just naturally do something. But conscientious means very, very carefully decide what to do. Okay? So, I will not be able to conclude this class, but I'll complete this class now. What I made was that those 4 points I started talking about modes and everything. I won't be able to go into the concept of modes at all in this class, but we'll focus on the broad principle of external and internal. So I'll make 2 quick points. Now for us, when we want to deal with the mind, so the topic of this class was rising above the mental platform. So that means what? That from the mind, certain propositions will keep coming because based on the impressions. Now some of them may be good, some of them may not be good. Like say when you are hearing a particular class, you might get some question. That's coming because you know something. And based on knowing something, something is not clear. So that's like a thought that is coming from inside. So now when certain propositions come, so sometimes some questions may make us more interested in the class. Okay, is this question going to be answered? Or maybe in future that may make us interest us more. But sometimes some point may be so provocative that that question just fills and consumes our mind and then we can't hear anything else. So if that's happening, then okay, I have this question, I need this answer, but I'll ask that afterwards. Don't let this question like block my consciousness. So basically, with respect to our mind, we need to adopt this approach of accepting what is favorable and rejecting what is unfavorable. So from our mind, we all have natural interests. In fact, understanding, developing, and tapping our natural interests is vital. Our interests, we could say, they are the gifts which are given to us by Krishna. And if we don't tap those interests, then we will, at one level, those abilities, those gifts, they will go waste. But at another level, what will happen is, see, we can develop interest in various things. That possibility is there. However, developed interests are rarely as spontaneous as natural interests. That means if somebody is naturally interested in language, that person can also develop interest in, say, arts or music or engineering, or there are so many things. But still, there are natural interests which are just natural. So in general, we may need to develop various interests in our life. So if I am given a particular service, if I have to do a particular job, then I have to develop interest in the subject. So with respect to our interests, there are natural and then there are developed interests. So of course, its classification is a little not black and white, because even natural interests need to be developed. But we can say here development, I had no natural interest in it, but I consciously developed interest in it. And that is also good, it's required. But natural interests, they are the things our mind is attracted to based on the impressions that are there. And these are they can be our strengths. If we have natural interest in something, we will be very easily absorbed in something. So if somebody has a Vaishya nature, that means they can very easily think about money, they can think about the financial dimension of things, how we can earn more, how we can manage costs. For somebody else, thinking about money is just, it's so exhausting. Is there a problem? Okay. So if we can find out our natural interest doesn't necessarily have to mean that we have to classify our interest into this Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. It is just one classification system. The important point is that we try to identify our natural interests. Then absorbing ourselves will become much easier. So even in our bhakti, we may find that each of us, while there are so many books, some of us may be naturally attracted to Bhagavatam, or some of us may be attracted towards Chaitanya Charitamrita, some of us may be attracted to Bhagavad Gita, or we will be attracted towards particular speakers, or we will be attracted towards particular topics. Within bhakti, we will be attracted towards particular services. So if we find that we are naturally attracted towards some things, then it will be easier to do that without needing to push ourselves too much, or without others needing to push us too much. So what is natural is usually also sustainable. So if say even before coming to bhakti, I had a natural interest in reading books, then nobody has to constantly look at my sadhana card and say, how much have you read, how much have you read, how much have you read. As soon as I have some time, I'll just pick up a book and start reading. So if we can find natural interests, then we won't need others to push us. We can sustain ourselves in our bhakti. And one way to rise above the mind is to rise with the mind. We say rise above the mental platform means within the mind there are certain impressions which can help us rise. So if we are naturally attracted towards music, then yes, we will have various activities in our service and our sadhana. But say whenever we have little time, we might start hearing kirtans, we might start learning new tunes, we might start learning new bhajans, and that becomes a natural absorption for us. So one way to rise above mental platform, we, if you want to rise above it, one way is rise with the mind. That means the rise with the mind's positive impressions. With the mind's positive impressions. That's why find these positive impressions, find our natural interests. And it may take some time to find it. And while we are going through this, don't get too caught. This is not my nature. This is not my nature. Again, if we are not very careful, one of the problems with the mind is that it is always dissatisfied with things as they are. If you ask the mind, what is my natural service? The mind will give one ready answer. What you are doing right now, that is not your natural service. So, there are times when the mind will oppose or dislike even that which is natural for us. Because just because something is natural does not necessarily mean it is easy. I like writing. But it's not that all the time I sit down to write and immediately nicely ideas come, and sometimes I write something and I feel that what I have written is so terrible that I should never ever write again. One author said, writing is extremely easy. You sit in front of a laptop and glare at the screen till drops of blood form on your forehead. So even if we like to do something, that doesn't mean we always like to do that thing. Because to do anything worthwhile in life requires effort. So even that which is natural for us, there are times when we'll get frustrated with it. But that will not be very long lasting. So we can't just leave it to our current emotions. I like this, so this is my natural for me. I don't like this, so this is not natural for me. This amount of reflection that is required. But overall, if we can find natural interests, then that's very helpful. And how do we find these natural interests? It is by guna and karma. It is, I think there is some button over here. It's causing this to change. So guna, we could say that is our, so guna and karma. Krishna says guna karma vibhagasha. So we can say guna is basically when we have the quality for doing something, then we are comfortable doing it. And then karma means there is competence in doing it. So when we are doing something, we feel good about doing it. And competence means we are good at doing it. The two are different things. Like when I am studying, when I am doing some music, when I am doing some counseling, or when I am doing some, maybe some people like to, I'm doing some marketing, I'm going out and I feel good. I feel good about doing it, and I am good at doing it. If you can find these two things, then that is a broad indication of what our nature is, or what our natural interests are. And those, if we can find those, then, and we develop those, then that's how our mind becomes our friend. And it helps us to rise above. And the last part which I mentioned, so to rise above the mental platform, we rise with the mind. That means find the positive impressions and then we tap those positive impressions. And the second is that we learn to look at the mind before we look with the mind. Now, what does this mean? Look at the mind before we look with the mind. That means we learn to observe our mind itself. Like earlier, I said that the mind is our link. The soul is here, the body, mind is here, the body is here. So in one sense, the mind is like the route through which I am observing. But it is that the mind has its own impressions. And because of that, it may prompt us to go in some directions. Say, for example, we are at home and we have children, and one child says, Mommy, there's fire in the house. Daddy, there is fire in the house. Now, we may immediately want to go there. And then actually, if there's fire, we'll go there. But if we know that child is a prankster, like the story of the child who cried wolf, always. So the child will say, look there, there's a fire. So we look there. But we'll also look at who is telling that. Okay, this child is a mischievous child. So maybe there's a prank, there's no fire over there. So we look where the child is pointing, but we also look at who is pointing. So in general, we need to become an observer of our mind. So the more we can learn to observe our mind, we will start recognizing. That's why in our tradition, the mind is often personified, treated like a separate person. Bhajahure manash nandanandana. What it means is, oh mind. It's almost like I am speaking to somebody else. Oh mind, focus on Krishna. Like we may preach to someone else, like that this is preaching to the mind. So treat the mind like a separate person. Just because the mind is inside us, that does not mean it is us. So when some thought comes in, rather than acting on the thought, think about that thought. Okay, I feel like eating, I feel like sleeping, I feel like yelling at that person. I feel like picking up this phone, surfing the internet, playing this game or watching this movie. Okay, when I feel that, see that as something that is coming up in our mind, which we have to decide. So going back to the phone metaphor, like in our phone, there are many notifications that come. Now just because a notification has come does not mean we have to notice it. Isn't it? Now some notifications deserve to be noticed. Some notifications need to be neglected. And we decide that. And this is where we can say the intelligence comes in. So if we learn to observe our mind, then we will ourselves come to know that sometimes the mind just gets excited about small things. Too excited about small things. Yeah, I don't have to get so worried about it. So we will observe our mind, and then whatever the negative impressions within it. Negative impressions means small pleasures the mind may exaggerate. The small problems the mind may exaggerate. So those negatives, we will be able to distance ourselves from them. And that is, Krishna says two things. Abhyasena to kaunteya, vairagyena cha gruyate. So abhyasa is focus. So focus becomes easier when we can work with the mind's positive impressions. And vairagya is essential when we are dealing with the mind's negative impressions. The mind will prop up and say negative. Okay, come on, eat this, come on, watch this, touch this. Not needed. Not needed. So abhyasa and vairagya. So the way we rise above the mental platform is finding within the mind that which is positive, that which is constructive, and developing that, and channeling that, engaging with that. And that which is negative within the mind, we slowly distance ourselves from it. So when Prabhupada says neglect the mind, he's not saying neglect the mind completely. What he means is, if we neglect everything from inside us, we'll start feeling tormented, we'll start feeling repressed, we'll feel suffocated. What he means is, Prabhupada also talks about Varanasham, he talks about natural tendencies which need to be developed. But the mind, the vasanas that are there in the mind, the lust, anger, greed, they need to be neglected. So when we become an observer of our mind, then we will be able to learn, okay, the mind is proposing this, let me not listen to it. And in this case, japa can be very helpful. Sometimes we feel I'm trying to concentrate on the holy name, not able to concentrate on the holy name, and we just get frustrated with that. Well, okay, yeah, we want to concentrate, but even if we can't concentrate on the holy name, even if we can become more aware that we are getting distracted. See, distraction is a bad thing, but awareness of distraction is a good thing. You getting this? Sometimes I am so distracted that I don't even notice I am distracted. Even in japa, even if we can't concentrate on the holy name, we can actually become more and more aware of our mind and how it distracts us. And that also is a good thing. So the mind may stray away, but don't let it stay away. It may stray away, bring it back. It may again go away, bring it back. We say, what is the point of this? This is what all I'm doing constantly. What is the use of it? Now, by this, we will become more and more aware of how our mind moves, where it goes. And that the capacity to become aware of our mind, to observe our mind, that will stand us in good stead. So even if we don't become Krishna conscious or we don't become holy name conscious, even just become during the process of chanting, if now the ideal will be we are absorbed. That means the holy name is coming from outside, from our tongue, and from the mind also there is remembrance of the glories of the holy name and there's absorption. But if that's not happening, even if there is awareness, okay, the mind is going here, the mind is going there. If we can become more and more aware and observant about our mind, that is also a step forward in self-realization. As we become more and more aware of our mind, we'll be able to more and more reorient the mind. And as we reorient the mind, gradually it will start becoming attracted to the holy name, to Krishna. So rather than thinking of japa as good or bad, oh, today my japa was very good, today my japa was very bad. Sometimes, even during bad japa, we can actually develop so-called bad japa. That means when we are distracted. We can be actually growing in self-awareness. Because at least we are aware. Okay, my mind went off, I tried to bring it back. It went off, I tried to bring it back. In this way, we can be growing in our spiritual life. Even through the activities that seem to be obstructing us in our spiritual growth. So I'll summarize. This class went a little longer than expected. So I talked mainly about 3 points today. The first point we talked about the internal external entanglement of the soul. I talked about how there is the mind inside and then the physical reality outside, and how the verse itself was talking about the mind modes, external situations, external actions, how they entrap the soul. We talked about vices and devices. So the internal external, how they act in consuming the consciousness of the soul. In one sense, the mind is like a link. It's like the route of consciousness. The soul is the root of consciousness. The ideal situation is the mind and the soul are, the mind and the body are, physical and mental stimuli are going together. That's when there is absorption. So the internal external was the first point we discussed. Within that, second point we discussed was how we complexify the simple. That means both at the level of the mind, there are positive and negative stimuli. So the positive stimuli are the varna, the samskars associated with the varna, the impressions. And the negative stimuli are those associated with the vasanas. So what we need to do is, we need to, so we discussed a little bit elaborately about these impressions which are there inside. And the last part was, how do we rise above the mental platform? We channel the positive, we rise with the positive, and then we observe and monitor, we regulate the negative. For that we need to become an observer, look at the mind before we look with the mind. So that is how we all can learn to rise above the mental platform, gradually, incrementally. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. So how much time do we have for questions, Prabhu? Okay, sure. Yes, Prabhu.
Like you mentioned that by observing our guna and karma, we can identify our natural inclination. So if our guna and karma are opposites, means our interest is something but we are good at something else, then which one should be more important?
So if our guna and karma, if our interest and if our competency are different, well, you could say that there are problems of scarcity and there are problems of plenty. So this is a good kind of problem to have. So I think it depends on the situation also. Sometimes we are in a particular situation where sometimes we don't have much flexibility. Maybe we have some professional, social, devotional responsibilities, and therefore we need to go along with what we are good at. But maybe later on in our life, things will change and we can develop something I'm naturally interested in. So if there is both, that is excellent. If one of them is also there, that is also good. Either of them is there, that's good, because then we can move forward in that direction. So just we try to, ultimately we are not our varna. We are souls who are parts of Krishna. We want to serve Krishna. So sometimes we serve Krishna by focusing on what we are good at. Sometimes we may focus on what we feel good doing. We develop that over a period of time. Okay, so we consult our senior devotees, guides, and see what is the nature of our responsibility, and whether that is urgent, that it be done now or can be done later. Okay, thank you. Yes, Mother, next question.
Hare Krishna, Guruji. Guruji, my question is, now whatever we were discussing was basically primarily focused on the person who is quite stable. I mean, then only he could focus on, he's that much aware of mind, and then he could focus on what is the, but, sometimes I'm asking in terms of clinically, depressed people or those kind of people, that awareness, that sort of understanding is not there. I mean, that stability is not there to sort of, work on it. Even if you are at, buddhi level, implementation doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So my question is, in those areas, while practicing bhakti, and in such circumstances, practicing bhakti becomes even more tedious because it has quite certain parameters to be fulfilled, and that also regularly and with discipline. So, how do we practice bhakti in that context, and what is that first step we need to take? As in, to come to this platform so that we can actually act on whatever you have discussed.
Okay, yeah. So if somebody is very mentally disturbed, in terms of say, having mental health problems, they just don't have the stability to analyze what is favorable, what is unfavorable, and then practicing bhakti also becomes a further struggle for them, like additional struggle apart from their mental struggles. Yes. So the principle of favorable and unfavorable can be applied at various levels. Say if somebody has some extreme fear, somebody has great fear of say elevators, just can't, they have claustrophobia or something like that. Now what do we do to deal with that? So they may say, I'll never go near an elevator. Okay. Now in general, by avoiding the objects of our fear, we will never outgrow the fear. So that's incremental. Krishna says, Shanai Shanai Ruparamed, gradually, step by step. Okay, as soon as you see an elevator, you feel fear. Okay, but can you take 10 more steps toward the elevator? Okay, yeah, 10 more steps I can take. I cannot even think of entering into an elevator. But yeah, a few steps I can take. So basically, there are times in our life when we could say, what is favorable or unfavorable is not clear for us, or even what is favorable is not doable for us. But it is not that it's entirely like that. Maybe there are 100 things in my life which are say which are for me to decide. Out of that, maybe 5 I know this is good for me, this is bad for me. And out of those 5, one thing I can do right now. And that one thing I can't do. Or one good thing I can do, one bad thing I can avoid. So wherever we are, see, we can start from there. And so just like if somebody is an addict, there's one way to give up addiction is to go cold turkey, just give it up completely. For some people it works. For those it doesn't work, it's regulation. Okay, if you can't, somebody is compulsory using a device, they just can't give up their device. Okay, and maybe every night for 8 hours, 6 hours, you turn off your device. Or maybe for 1 hour you just look at the device once. Some level of regulation. So in general, it's very important for such an individual to develop trust in oneself. That even if you want to trust somebody else, even if you want to trust our spiritual master, but we have to trust ourselves in our capacity to know who is a good spiritual master. We have to trust ourselves in our capacity to implement what a spiritual master is saying. So trust in oneself is developed only in one way. It is by setting, or rather 2 ways, setting realistic goals and then sticking to those goals. It could be very simple. Now, sometimes what happens is that we sleep at 11 o'clock and then you set the alarm at 3 o'clock. Now, when we are setting the alarm itself, we know we are not going to wake up. And then the alarm rings, we turn it off, we go to sleep, and then when we wake up, we beat ourselves up. I never wake up on time. So, what we are doing by this is, we are not just lacking willpower, rather, we are destroying our own faith in ourselves. So, if I know I need 6 hours sleep, maybe I can manage 5.5 hours. How? If I set a target which is achievable for me, even if it's a modest target, I achieve it, that develops my trust in myself. And then as I develop my trust in myself, I can grow. So then, in such a situation, we may have to ask that person, okay, what can you do? What is doable for you? Somebody is a compulsive phone addict. Okay, what can you do? For 15 minutes, can you avoid using a phone every day? Yeah, 15 minutes is possible. That's no big deal. For somebody else, 15 minutes, that's such a trivial thing. But no, that may not be trivial for that person. If somebody who had a fracture, for them to just lift their arm might be a big thing after the fracture. For somebody else, it's just natural. So basically, set small goals, whatever is a doable goal for that person at that time, and achieve that. And that's how they will go from wherever we are. Now, we all have to begin from where we are. As if only we are hoping I would have been there and from there I would have gone so nicely. That's of no use. This is where I am. From here, how can I move forwards? So even bhakti principles also have to be adapted accordingly. So somebody who has a very 1-0 attitude toward bhakti. You practice bhakti means, you have to do this and this and this and this and this. Then people say, forget it, I'll never do any of this. So then somebody has to be very considerate to understand, what can this person do? And let them just do that. And engage them. When Srila Prabhupada was in India yesterday, I was talking to Bhaktivinoda Prabhu and he was explaining how, when Prabhupada was in India yesterday, Prabhupada was very different from the way he was preaching in America. As the life members, he didn't insist on them, you have to chant 16 rounds, chant 16 rounds, chant 16 rounds. No, they wanted to do some seva and Prabhupada engaged them in seva. With his Western disciples, they did a lot of fundraising, they had a lot of energy to distribute books and get money. He got them to do that. So we have to be considerate to understand. So it's more like a mutual discussion to help the person understand not just understand and decide what they can do, and then to make progress toward that. Okay. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Any last question? We'll stop with this. There's one question here somewhere. Okay. Quickly.
Thank you very much for the wonderful class. In between the class, you were mentioning about chanting. While we are chanting, that mind goes somewhere and we have to bring it back. Also, you were telling that mind is like a channel, so that we can access the external world. Means how do we know that when the mind is observing somewhere else in distraction? Means who is actually knowing it and how can we bring it there?
Okay. So let me try to re-articulate your question. What you're saying is that I said that if the mind goes off, we can bring it back. So who is actually being aware and who is going to bring the mind back? Yeah, so that's what I said. We are talking about this diagram of the soul, mind and body. So basically, what happens is for us, the soul is here, the mind is going here somewhere, and then the body is here. The physical situation, the physical and the mental are going in opposite different directions. So at one level, because the soul is in a particular body, you could say some level of consciousness is always there at the physical level. Now we could say majority of the consciousness is here. So somebody might be driving a car, and while driving the car, they're lost in their own thoughts. Maybe it's like India, you cannot be lost in your thoughts while driving in a car. There's too much happening at the physical level. But at the external level. But suppose it's like a long straight road, nothing happening on the road. So people get lost in their own thoughts. But then suddenly you hear a loud honking sound. This is one big difference in traffic in India and America. In India, everybody blows horns. America, you never blow a horn at anyone. It's like you blow a horn, it's only when that person has done something outrageously wrong. There are people, there are drivers who have sued other drivers for blowing the horn at them. That means you say that to blow a horn means it's almost like in India what you could call giving a gali. To blow a horn is like saying you drove so offensively, you're such a terrible driver that I had to blow a horn to warn you. So anyway, the point I'm making is that if there is a sudden distraction, so if you are driving along a road and suddenly we hear a loud horn, then there is some consciousness that is there at the physical level. So when there is a sudden loud horn, what will happen is the mind will be dragged over here. So our consciousness, if there is a very powerful stimuli over here, then what will happen is this will be pulled over here like this. So in general, the soul's consciousness is distributed between the body and the mind. And some of it is in the body, some of it is in the mind. How much in where, that depends. So it is always the soul who is aware. Now, when I say the mind is a channel for consciousness, what it means is that even this consciousness, which I drew it like this over here, actually it is like this. It is a part of the mind is aware over here, but a majority of the mind is going over there. So it's like on my phone, say I am watching this class on Zoom. So that is the main screen. But maybe there's a pop-up window that has come. So if your friend has updated their Facebook profile photo, there's a small window over there. So I'm using the mind to focus on the class. I'm using the phone to focus on the class. But on the phone itself, something else is coming. So now for us, what we need to do is, in general, if something is important for us, then it's better to be there in conducive or even somewhat little compulsive, not compulsive, like little a physical stimuli that force us to come back to the physical level. Say if we are sitting at home and hearing a class, then we can very easily get distracted. And nobody will notice, nobody will warn us, and we'll just get caught in distraction. But you're sitting surrounded by other devotees and we're hearing class. Then what happens is the physical aids in the physical helps bring the mind back. And that's why we try to make the physical as conducive as possible for the mind to be back where it is. So it is ultimately the soul who is conscious. The soul's consciousness gets distributed in the body and the mind, and we try to bring both of them together in the desired direction. Okay. So thank you very much. Grantraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki, Itai Gaur Premanande. So,